Hey everyone, Disturbed Shadow here. Happy New Year, and welcome to my final video of 2014, which is, of course, my countdown of my top 10 favorite albums of 2014. Getting a little ahead of myself there. Anyway, this is a list that I had a bit of difficulty putting together because there's just so many good albums that came out, but I did end up being able to narrow down to just 10, although I had a ton of honorable mentions, which I could have made a top 20 almost because of how many of them, but for one reason or another, these ones didn't crack the top 10. So I'm going to start off with these ones and mention why they didn't make on the countdown. So the first one is Once More Around the Sun by Mastodon, which is a really awesome release, and it would have been number 11 if this had been the top 20 or top 11 or whatever. But something about the other 10 albums just were a little bit better, so that's why I ended up not including this on the final list, but it's definitely worth a mention. It's definitely worth checking out because it's a pretty solid album, and it's a really good Mastodon album. Like, it has the qualities that make it a very fantastic Mastodon album. So go check that one out. The next honorable mention is 1000 Horsepower by Godsmack. I mean, it's a really solid album, except they're not really doing anything new or different than previous releases. They're going with the whole if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach, which they've been going with since their beginning. It's a good album, but it's just not one of the top 10 albums of the year. Titan by Septic Flesh is another one that I wanted to put on this list, but there's just other albums I enjoyed better. It's a really, really good album, and it's just heavy, and it's got this crazy orchestral stuff going on behind it, and it's a really awesome album, but it's not exactly the genre I go for. It's a bit like too death metal-y for me. I'm very particular about my death metal music, so it's not as good in my eyes as some of the other releases this year, but it's still a really good album and you should go check it out. Point 5, The Gray Chapter by Slipknot. Much like Godsmack's album this year, it's a really, really, really good album, except it's not really doing anything different or new or interesting. There's like, they're Slipknot's back and they're doing something really cool and different. They're not really doing that. They're taking the safe approach and going with something that just feels like Slipknot. So it's a good album, but like I said, there's other albums that I enjoyed more this year. La Gargola by Chevelle, which is not a metal album. It's an alt rock, alt metally, maybe slightly metally album. It's a really good album from them, but I enjoyed other albums this year, so that's another one that I just want to mention. Going to Hell by the Pretty Reckless. I thought this band was going to be just another poppy female-fronted rock band, but they're actually pretty enjoyable, and this was a pretty enjoyable album, and it's pretty good, so go check that one out as well. The Satanist by Behemoth is another one I really wanted to put on this list, but it just got beaten by several other albums. But it's a really good Behemoth album, and you should go check it out. The Serpent in the Sphere by Agalloch. I'd never heard of this band until people this year just talking about how good this album was. So I gave it a listen, and it's pretty good, but there's other albums I enjoyed more this year, but this is still a really excellent album. And the last honorable mention is The Hunting Party by Linkin Park. And this one caught my interest because they brought back their heavier style that they had on their first two albums. So I thought that was interesting, and I think that's the right choice to make. They were sort of experimenting with their sound for the last 2, 3, 4 albums. I don't remember how many. I haven't really followed them since Minutes to Midnight, but I think this is a really good return to form for them, and I think it was the right time to go back to their roots. So those are the 9 albums that I just wanted to mention. Now let's get into the actual top 10 albums. So, start off, number 10, Blood for Blood by Hell Yeah, which I was not actually expecting to put on this list. But after giving it a few listens, I realized that they really stepped up their game on this one, and I think this is actually the best album they've made so far. They had a major lineup change. Greg and Bob both left the band, but apparently that was a good thing, because Tom was saying that it gave him a chance to write the album he wanted, since he had a lot more writing responsibility this time around. And I think it really shows that there's a change of pace with this. They dropped the sort of Southern hillbilly shenanigans and all that and lyrical themes that they had that kind of were a little cheesy at times. And they went for a more straight, like, rocky, metally themes like more personal stuff and like more traditional metal themes, not really the Southern hillbilly stuff that was kind of odd considering most of these guys came from bands like Nothing Face and Mudvayne, which really isn't their style. I mean, Vinny was really the only one who came from a sort of southern cowboy type band. But anyway, they decided to get rid of that shit and just go for a more straight approach, and I think it was for the better. And this album is just super aggressive, but also there's a lot of more melodic, pulled back moments where it's almost beautiful. Like the song "Moth" is just, I didn't see that one coming. It's very melodic, and it's not really something that Hell Yeah had been doing before, and it really shows off Chad's vocal talents more akin to what he did in Mudvayne. And there are a lot of cool stuff where the guitars are harmonizing. The guitar work, and it's just or Tom Maxwell doing the guitars this time around. But there's just so much cool guitar stuff happening, and I think that it really makes the music better. And Vinny is playing his ass off on this. It's some of the best playing I've heard from him in Hell Yeah. And it's more like stuff he was playing back in Pantera, and I think that's really cool. And I think that this album really deserves to crack the top 10 because of how much effort they put into making this their best album yet. Track number 9, the 17th album, album number 9, the 17th studio album from Judas Priest. I can't believe these guys are still going for fucking 45 years and still putting out really good albums. This album sort of feels like a mix of old school Priest, like Screaming for Vengeance era, mixed with a little bit of Painkiller, and it sounds really good. And despite how old these guys are getting, they still play and sing really well. I mean, I can't believe how good Rob Halford's voice still is after all these years. He can't really hit the same high notes he was hitting back on like Painkiller and stuff like that, but he can still get pretty high considering how old he is. And there's just so much good stuff on this album, like Dragonaut, Redeemer of Souls, Halls of Valhalla, March of the Damned. These are all really, really good songs. And even without KK Downing, Richie Falconer coming in, him and Glenn are doing a very good job of doing all this cool guitar stuff. So, losing one of their famous guitar players is not slowing these guys down. Album number 8, White Devil Armory from Overkill. It's their 17th album. They've just been consistently cranking out these things for 34 years, and it's just amazing that they can just put out so many albums so quickly and that they're all super good, super consistent. And I think that really shows the talent that these guys have. This album is super thrashy, and there's all this cool guitar stuff and heavy, and Bobby Blitz vocals are just awesome, and it's just a really good thrash album. It's probably the best thrash album of the year. Track number 7. Album number 7, At War with Reality from At the Gates. It's been 19 years since they last released the album, which of course was their masterpiece, Slaughter of the Soul, which basically defined the genre of melodic death metal. I mean, it's really hard to live up to the hype of that, and there was no way they were going to top that. I mean, there was a slight chance, but in fans' eyes, that's like a masterpiece, and you can't beat that. But At War with Reality is a super solid album, and they still have that chemistry after all these years of not writing new material together, only just going and playing their old stuff when they finally reconciled and did all those reunion tours. But they still have that chemistry, and they write really good music together, and this is a really solid melodic death metal album, and it definitely deserves to be up here. Another melodic death metal album, album number 6 on my countdown, is Shadows of the Dying Sun by Insomnium. These guys are super consistent with their work. It's always these beautiful layers of guitars and sound, and it's just amazing. And I just get chills listening to this album. There's just so much cool melodic layering of guitars and keyboards and vocals, and it's just, how do they do this? Almost every album has these elements that are just so good. Shadows of the Dying Sun is probably my favorite Insomnium album. It just has so much beautiful melodic pieces in it. It just, like I said, I get chills listening to this album. Album number 5, we're finally in the top 5. Bloodstone and Diamonds from Machine Head. They were going through some troubled times after Unto the Locust, and I guess there was tensions with Adam Duce, and they decided to get rid of him, and they came back heavy with their new bassist, Jared, who did a really good job on this one. And this album is just so heavy. It's probably the heaviest Machine Head album I've heard. It's just so many big, heavy, crushing riffs and all these cool, fast, melodic bits where they're harmonizing, and it's just, I love it. And there's all these good songs like Now We Die, Killers and Kings, and Night of the Long Knives, where Rob's just going insane on the vocals. He's just got so much energy behind his voice that I haven't heard from him in years. It comes together so nicely. The loss of Adam Duce has not slowed these guys down at all, and Jared fits right along with the guys in Machine Head, and this is a really, really good album. Album number 4 is an album I did not see coming this year, which is the third album from the progressive metal band Cynic, entitled Kindly Bent to Free Us, which is just a really interesting album. It sounds like a blend of like modern progressive metal and like old school like 70s, 80s prog rock, and it just comes together really nicely, and it's really different than their past two albums, and it's like really just interesting. And then Paul Masvidal's voice is just beautiful. It's just, I don't even know how to describe how amazing his voice is. And then he's a really good guitar player on top of that. And then Sean Malone on the bass is just really loud in the mix and doing all this different stuff from what Paul is doing. And then they work really good together and just switching up and interesting. And then Sean Renair is a really good drummer on top of that. And the three of them just work really nicely together and creates this truly unique sounding album that I've not really heard anywhere else before. So if you're like a fan of like prog rock or metal, just check this thing out because it's really cool. Album number 3 is from an album from a local band here in Boston, and it's just I went to high school with their frontman, but I barely knew him. But anyway, I've been following them for years now, and if you may remember, back in 2012, I named their debut EP as one of my top 5 albums of that year. And now it's 2014, and they put out their first full-length album, which is called The Lives I Ruined, and this band is called My Missing Half. It was just really good. It's really good melodic death metal, and it's kind of unique sounding. I haven't really heard any other bands that sound exactly like them. There's just all this cool guitar stuff, this cool harmonization parts, heavy riffs, and then vocal work from Bijan is just really good. He has a really good range, mostly does mid-range screams, but he has these really low growls and these high-pitched screams that he throws in. He keeps things it's very interesting. Their bassist Alex is turned up really loud in the mix as well. You can always hear what the bass is doing, and he's always doing little parts that are a little bit different than the guitar to keep things interesting. And then their drummer, John Matthews, is just really, really good. He's really fast, and just all these crazy fills and all this kind of stuff that keeps it really interesting. Well, overall, it's a really good album, and I expect to see good things from these guys in the future. And I mean, they're starting to get recognized. They're actually, for the Dark Tranquillity Insomnium tour that's coming up next month, for the show here, they're actually opening that show when they're playing in Massachusetts, which I think is really cool that they're opening for these big bands that I like to listen to and that are also on this list. I mean, I'm actually rating this higher than Insomnium's album this year because this is just a really good album. So if you haven't heard of My Missing Half, go check them out. Go check out this album, The Lives I Ruined. It's really good. Moving on, album number 2 is the new album War Eternal from Arch Enemy. They put this album out after Angela Gasol stepped down as the front woman for this band. She's been the front woman for this band for years. She's the one who put them on the map and really paved the way for female vocalists and female musicians in extreme metal. And people were like, where are they going to go without Angela? But she handpicked Alyssa from The Agonist to front this band, and she's doing an amazing job. And Angela could not have picked someone better to replace her. Alyssa's vocals are just fabulous on this album. She does all these low screams, growls, high screams. It all comes together really nicely. And it just sounds like a super, super solid Arch Enemy album, and that they haven't slowed down a bit. And the guitar work is amazing, and the drumming is insane, and the bass is loud. There are a few parts where the bass really isn't doing too much interesting, but other than that, I mean, this is a really good album, and you should definitely check it out. Arch Enemy have not lost their touch at all, even with such a big change-up, and I expect them to continue to do good things with Alyssa. And wrapping up, my number 1 album of this year is Watchers of Rule, the 6th album from the metalcore band Unearth. This album sort of caught me by surprise with just how much better it was than their previous album, Darkness and the Light, which I really enjoyed, and Shadows of the Light, which is sort of the title track of this album. Off that album is one of my favorite Unearth songs ever. And they really stepped it up from that, which was a really good album. This Watchers of Rule is just incredible. It blew my mind when I listened to it. And the first time I heard it, I'm just like, this album is going to be my number 1 album because it's just so good. the musicianship is just leagues ahead of where they were before. The melodic guitar bits, the how fast and shreddy bits, it's all just comes together so nicely, and it's just some of the best musicianship I've heard from them. Just overall, it's just a really good album. And their new drummer, Nick Pierce, does an amazing job on this album. And I think he was sort of the missing piece to tie this band together. It's just incredible. The drumming that he brings to the table is just insane. And then layered with all the crazy guitar stuff that Ken and Buzz are doing, it's just amazing how much better this is than some of their past releases. I think it actually is the best Unearthed album out there. They just took it to a whole nother level. And just everyone. Trevor's vocals are so good. They're so brutal and heavy. It's just there's just so much energy that I really haven't heard from him before. It's just so much passion in his voice, and it's just wow. One thing I do want to mention is that John Maggard, who was their bassist for a long time, actually left the band before this album was recorded, and I couldn't find any crediting for who actually played the bass on this album. The bass was pretty good as well, but like I said, it really wasn't credited to anyone. But whoever it was, you did a good job on the bass as well. So overall, this is a really good album, and it really deserves to be the #1 album. And I haven't seen it on any list, any of these sort of lists before, but it's just so underrated, and I think that people should really check this album out because it's some of Unearth's best work. Well, that's the countdown, guys. I hope you liked it. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite albums were this year, and I will see you guys next year.